publicly shared on Appropedia. This is a great way for us to keep an archive and also be able to point folks to the call who are not able to attend today. We're going to do introductions. We have a small enough group that we might just kind of like ping around the room super quick once we get to that part. We'll see where we're at in time, but I think that'd be nice for our speaker also to know who is here. If you have any technical difficulties or if you want to drop in questions as we go, please use the chat function. Myself and Scan will be keeping an eye on it. Again, mute if you are not speaking, raise your hand if it feels like there's a lot of people that want to comment on one thing. And I just also want to acknowledge, that we're still sort of in a pandemic. We are still in a pandemic, and we're all kind of going back and forth between virtual lives and in-person lives, and everybody has different situations. So all of this to say, please be kind and caring as you're thinking about communicating with one another. All right, so why are we doing these calls? We've been doing them since early 2021, late 2020, and the idea was to start out and better understand how the open movement can respond to meaningfully address the climate crisis. And we're thinking about topics of open, ranging everything from what Monica is working on, open access and OER, to building in open environmental and climate data sets and open hardware and the knowledge commons, that we're seeing arise in places such as Appropedia and Wikimedia. So this is the second season of our call, and we're kind of coming to an end of this season. This may be the last one because we have some new activities coming up. We took a break in July and August, specifically to focus on some new activities. So coming soon, we'll be having an open climate coordinator joining us, which we're really, really excited about, to help us build up some of the work that we're doing. And we'll also be announcing a 2023 Open Climate Fellowship Program. So please stay tuned. And again, if you'd like to receive more information, you are welcome to leave your contact information in the document. You can always read about or watch our previous calls on the Appropedia wiki page, which is linked in the document, but maybe Emilio, you could drop in a link as well. And we have a couple of articles, one that came out in 2021 called Open Climate Now, and one that we just released in June that's called Open Climate Then and Now, which is some of our learnings from the first year of our calls. And this is in the magazine Branch, which the entire issue is dedicated to open climate. So I really encourage everyone to take a look, and maybe somebody who knows where that is located online can also drop that link. Oh, looks like you beat me to it. Thank you, Scan. Okay, so we're just going to do a very, very, very brief round of introductions. I'm going to call people rather than popcorning it. Name, pronouns, maybe where you're at in the world, and what your interest is in this topic in literally one sentence. And I apologize, but I will cut you off because we are on a timetable today and we want to get to Monica. So, all right, I'm going to pass it to Emilio, please.
Hey, I'm Emilio. I work for Appropedia Foundation, and I'm personally very interested in how to bring people together in terms of sustainability, openly but correctly. So.
Thank you. Davis.
Good morning. My name is Davis. I'm from New York City. I'm here representing Metropolitan New York Library Council, which is a consortium of libraries and archives. We're looking at starting a program area in climate justice for libraries and archives here in New York City and our suburbs to the north, Westchester County. So I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks. Jean-No.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jean-Louis Landry based in Montreal in Canada. Longtime open data activist, interested in the kind of access and interoperability of open or climate relevant data, and then also the movement building piece through the Obama Climate Leaders Network. So happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Andres?
Hola, Andres here from in Barcelona. I'm the co-founder and co-director of a creative research lab called I Am, and an initiative called the Billion Seconds Institute, where we are looking to reimagine the digital economy. And I'm here because I'm really looking forward to learn how this open approach can really help us practice more critical hope when it comes to address the social ecological implications of everything digital in the environmental emergency.
Great. And Andres also wrote an excellent article for the branch open climate issue, which I suggest you check out. Melissa.
Hi there. I'm Melissa Hageman, based outside of DC. I'm with the Open Society Foundations now. And I've been working on open access for many years, but on a global scale across all fields. And we thought there might be real traction in focusing just narrowly on one field and thinking that climate science and biodiversity could have great traction. So very interested in the field and really excited that this call is happening. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Dee Dee.
It's still quite early here. I'm in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. My name's Dee Dee. I'm a science and open, well, I guess open scholarship librarian, scholarly communication librarian here at the university. I've been an open access advocate for many years. And I just saw that Monica was going to give a presentation today on the Open Access Week theme of open climate justice. So I wanted to participate and find out more about that.
Great, thank you. Ross.
Hi there, sorry I won't be turning my camera on today. I'm the Director of Open Access Programs. My pronouns are he, him. Yeah, I'm just really interested in this project because obviously Arcadia is involved in it, and I will be lurking on this call. So thank you.
Thank you. And Matt.
Hi, Matt Rumsey from the Center for Open Data Enterprise. We have been doing a variety of projects on climate data, open climate data for action specifically in the US and also more and more globally. We're working with Jean Noé a little bit and he turned us on to this. And I think just wanted to make sure we're getting more and more connected in these spaces. And I think also we've always been big supporters of open access and that sort of work. So I want to make sure that we're sort of bringing in and learning from this as we can. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Scan.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Evelyn, also known as Can. I'm based in Uruguay, and I'm helping with some things related to open climate. I'm also leading a project on Wikimedia of Uruguay and focusing a lot on climate change. How can we bring climate change issues into Wikipedia?
Great. And then over to Monica. And please just a quick introduction of yourself and then take it away.
Sounds great. Thanks, Shannon. Hi, everybody. I'm Monica Granados. I am the Open Climate Campaign Manager at Creative Commons, and I have the privilege to get to lead, along with 3 of our partners in the Open Climate Campaign, the work that will be going on for the next 4 years with the focus of really leading the charge and getting us to sort of open by default for climate change and biodiversity research. So my background actually is as a climate researcher. So I have a PhD in ecology. That is where I first sort of learned about science and the way that we do science and the research cycle. And I went to a workshop in North Carolina, somewhere in the middle of my PhD. And that's where I was introduced to these open topics. And it was transformational for me. I was like, there's a different way to do science. Like, we don't have to publish behind a paywall. We don't have to keep our data to ourselves. And it's better for scientists and the public. And I just couldn't believe that this wasn't the way that we operated, that this wasn't the default. And I came back and I was just like, basically started preaching about the Church of Open Science, and did workshops and seminars, and ultimately led me to doing my full-time career is to work to make science more open, transparent, and equitable. And so when there was an opportunity to work really at the intersection of like what my background is and my passion for open science, I thought, and as Shannon and Scan have quite likely recognized, is that there's probably not a more important issue that the open community could be working on. And so we're really here at the Open Climate Campaign really grateful for this invitation and also for the connection to this community. We really want to ensure that these are not disparate movements, and these are not disparate programs, that we work together and leverage our communities and the work that we're doing to get us to that ultimate goal of open, transparent, and equitable science, particularly around climate change and biodiversity research. So what I want to do today is I want to give you a little bit of an overview of the Open Climate Campaign. Some of you folks here are familiar with it. And then I want to specifically talk about one of the goals that we have in the campaign around ensuring that traditionally underrepresented groups, voices, particularly in underrepresented geographical areas, are included in the type of work that we do towards open access, particularly around climate change and biodiversity research. And I think a lot of us here, especially those that are in the global north, are aware of some of the problems, but there are probably other things that we're not. And we can't speak for these regions and for these scholars. And it's really important that they are integrated in these calls, in seminars, and as part of this campaign that we're running. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen. And can you folks see the slides? Perfect. Okay. So I think I'm sort of speaking to a very knowledgeable crowd here, but we're going to start with the concept that open sharing of research outputs is not the default. As I mentioned, I thought that's just how you did science, and nobody really questioned that, and that's just how we did. And that's how my supervisor was taught to do science, and his supervisor before that. It ends up being that we're going to take, a snapshot of data to give you an idea of, where we're standing with this problem. Is that if you were to take, all of the papers, for a chunk of a time period in the United States, only about 41% are open access in the United States, so from authors in the United States, and about 38% are open from Canadian authors. I'm based in Ottawa, so I'm particularly curious of that percentage. And then one of the things that really spurred thinking about the Open Climate Campaign, and particularly about the challenge of climate change, is that we saw as a community, I think we all really can recognize that something changed with COVID-19. I actually remember when the pandemic was declared, I got a call from a researcher at York University, and he said, how do we make the research that we're going to be doing around emergency management open? I just got a lot of those calls because there was this recognition that this is different, or at least that all of the things that we know are helpful and accelerate research around open needs to be applied to urgent problems. And we were facing this very serious urgent problem of COVID-19. And the community responded. I got calls. There was, task force were enabled. The chief science advisors of several different countries put a letter together asking publishers to allow a special exemption for COVID-19 literature. Publishers responded. The number of preprints deposited quadrupled over the course of the last 3 years of the pandemic. And about 70, you could really see that in the data, 77% of COVID-19 related papers are open access. That is really a stark contrast to the 41 and 38% snapshots that we have of papers from the United States and Canada, which generally have pretty high relative to other countries due to their economic status around open access. And really what that spurred in the discussions with actually some of the board, the steering committee of the Open Climate Campaign and starting to think about, this type of work, is that, there was a recognition that when we are facing global scale problems, We need to have the information about that problem be open so that we can get to a solution as quickly as possible. We need to enable the full potential of science to get us to treatments, to get us to vaccines, to get us to mitigation efforts, in emergency management. And so, if you take a step back, you could start to think then, this was a global grand challenge. It's one of the world's biggest problems. It continues to be one of the world's biggest problems. Well, what about other large global problems? If we're going to solve some of the world's biggest problems, then the knowledge about them have to be open. And so what greater problem that is facing humanity than climate change, right? COVID-19 had these characteristics where it left no one untouched on the planet. Everybody was affected by this, regardless of geographical area, regardless of economic status. Of course, there was more effects depending on some of those variables, but it really did leave no one untouched and continues, right, to affect our day-to-day lives. And we're going to see something very similar for climate change. And some people are already, and even along those, geographical variables and economic status as well, it is going to leave no one untouched. And in many ways, we're already starting to see the effects of climate change. And so this really is one of the world's biggest problems. And so, inspired by what happened with the global response and the response from scholars, the response from policymakers, the response from publishers, we started to think we need to apply those same principles to climate change. We need the solutions, the knowledge, the foundational research around climate change to be open so that can catalyze solutions and mitigation strategies to lead us to combating the climate change crisis. And so we recently launched the Open Climate Campaign, where the ultimate goal of this campaign is really to move towards an open by default practice around climate change and biodiversity research around the entire research cycle. So we're talking about including the publications, including the research data, software, open educational research, open educational resources, and hardware. So we need that research to be open to accelerate us to solutions and mitigations. And so to get us there, we have put together 11 goals to promote open access to research and to, again, accelerate our progress to solving the climate crisis, but also preserving global biodiversity. And so with the help from the Open Society Foundations and the Arcadia Fund, we, Creative Commons, Spark, and Eiffel have put together what we call the Open Climate Campaign, and these 11 goals to get us, to this ultimate goal. So what are the 11 goals? So the first is campaign messaging. So, we want to capture several different audiences to really tell them about the importance of making your research open, the importance of research in itself being open around climate change and biodiversity research. So as I mentioned earlier, I, as a researcher at some point, didn't know about open access. And so we want to get messaging out there, particularly to researchers, and say, the work that you're doing is incredibly important because you are working on one of the world's greatest challenge. And we want to highlight the importance of your research and its necessity to be open, and give you some potential tools to also help you in that journey towards open. We also want to get a snapshot of where are we in terms of open access around climate change and biodiversity research. There's a couple of people who've been starting to work on this question. We have a lot of data out there around what the percentage of open access, across different countries, and then obviously specifically around like COVID-19. But we want to know for climate change research, where are we, so that we know where we need to get to as well. And that's not a simple question, particularly because it's hard to define what's climate change research, right? As I mentioned earlier, climate change is something that really affects so many different parts of our lives, and also so many different disciplines, right? It's not really specific to ecology or evolutionary biology. There's research around climate change in the humanities and social sciences as well. So that's some of the work that we started to do, and we're working with the current Open Knowledge Initiative to help us get some of that information. We also want to identify legal and policy barriers. So what do we mean by that? Why don't we have open access policies now? If we know what big issue this is, particularly around climate change and biodiversity research, and that we need science in order to get us to solutions, but we don't have open access policies across the board, whether we're talking at the national level or at the institutional level. That's not the current status quo. And so what are some of these legal and policy barriers, so that we can think about how do we overcome those barriers? How do we make it easier for institutions and for governments to make open access open practices the default for their researchers and their practitioners? 4, 5, and 6 are about OA policies. So once we've identified the legal and policy barriers, and working with our steering committee and our 3 partners, we have a lot of expertise in our group, and so we do know about many of these legal and policy barriers, and we're going to use that information to work directly with government funders and environmental organizations to create open access policies. And that's one of the things that I'm most excited about this work, is that we're not just launching a campaign and telling people, go do open access. Open access is great. Why haven't you done it yet? Get to it. There's something to be said for raising the awareness around open access. But what I'm really excited about this campaign is that we're doing more than just preaching about open access. We're going to help you get to open access. And so we're going to be working directly hand in hand with a subset of governments, funders, and environmental organizations to help them put together an open access policy and also implement it. We're also thinking about inclusion into international frameworks. So the inclusion of open access language in international frameworks like the Convention on Biological Diversity, for example. And so there are frameworks that are often under the auspices of the United Nations. For example, they're going to be discussing digital sequence information and how that gets moved across countries, and sort of what kinds of regulations around digital sequence information should exist. And we want to have some open access language there as well. And so it's not just about open access policies for publications, but also some of this sort of real world integration and implications around international frameworks. We also want people to, talk about the campaign. So we would like to talk to environmental organizations and organizations like the Open Climate Calls to secure some endorsements, and to have people talk about the campaign, and to and it's less about the campaign, but about the like goals of the campaign, which I think we all really share, and many organizations that we've spoken to share, and that is that we recognize that research around climate change and biodiversity research needs to be open. Number 9 is about collaborating with traditionally excluded voices in open knowledge. And so we really want this to be a global campaign. We do have partners in other geographical regions than just the global north, but many decisions around open access have been driven by global north, right? And there's a lot of innovations that have happened in Latin America that haven't seeped into the global north because there is sort of the separation and oftentimes paternalism too that happens from the global north. And we want to ensure that this campaign doesn't just take that perspective, because there are specific challenges that different geographical regions face, and that our advocacy and discussion with governments, funders, and environmental organizations cannot be just driven from a North American or global North perspective. 10 and 11 are our secondary goals. And so what we want to do with 10 and 11 is also, the previous goals are thinking really about what comes sort of after the integration or the adoption of these policies and language and international frameworks. We think that that's going to have an effect moving forward from, time from this present time period. But it may also then mean that a lot of really fundamental and foundational research, often cited in some of the most important publications and literature around climate change, like the IPCC report, may remain behind paywalls. So some of the work that we want to do is also get a corpus of papers around climate change and biodiversity research that has been assessed as some of the most important, the most foundational, perhaps some of the most highly cited papers, and what is termed as unbind them, so make them open. And there's a couple of different routes that we can take to do that, including the green open access route, so depositing in an institutional repository, and that just means working with the researcher for many of these papers that may have already be eligible to deposit in a repository and help them do the work or do the work ourselves. And then finally, again, on the heels of the special calls we've seen for COVID-19 and for now monkeypox, to talk to and build relationships with publishers about special exemptions for climate change and biodiversity research. We'll see what happens with that goal. I think ultimately we would like to have all research be open and, not just rely on special exemptions for some of these really important global challenges. But we want to make sure, especially some of that foundational literature and research is open. So what I want to do next, now that I've given you an overview of the Open Climate Campaign, I'm particularly honored to be at this with this community, because I know there are different geographical regions that are present in this call, and I want to specifically talk about goal number 9. And goal number 9, again, is to collaborate with traditionally excluded voices in open knowledge. And here are some of the ideas that we have so far for goal number 9. So what we want to do is to identify and convene leaders from these traditionally underrepresented geographical regions. And so that may look like a working group. It may look like, we reconvene calls. It may mean in-person meetings. But we want to convene these leaders so that we have their lived experience and their experience with publishing and with the research cycle, and integrate their experiences into the advocacy that we do for the Open Climate Campaign. As I mentioned earlier, we also want to identify specific topics And I'm aware of some, but I'm not going to be aware of all. And I can't pretend to do that. And that would also be a disservice if, as a campaign, we thought we knew all of the challenges. And so we want to make sure that we make space and room at the table for these voices and to particularly highlight challenges. We want to ensure, again, that their voices are highlighted in the campaign. And we've thought about, recording and sharing interviews too, and then amplifying those voices. And so the Open Climate Campaign has resources and connections that will allow us to get the message out far and wide, and we want to amplify those voices as well. But this is our perspective and our idea. And so what I wanted to spend some time to thinking about as well is, what's the best way to do that? What's the best way to really engage this community? I've been involved in community building through an organization I also help run called Pre-Review. And I know the importance of community building in any type of movement and any type of initiative around open access. I truly believe that they will build it and they will come is completely false. We need to build that community and support that community. But there are different ways in which I think a community wants to be engaged and wants to feel valued and then feels valued. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that with you folks today as part of our discussion. But why don't we get to questions first, and then we can move on to a discussion.
Great. Any questions? You can raise your hand or go ahead and jump right in. All right.
I've got a question.
Go ahead. Sorry, I was nodding my head at you.
Oh, okay. It's all good. Thank you so much, Monica. It's really nice to hear from you and to learn more about the campaign. I guess I'm kind of wearing different hats, but one of them is really touches, I think, to the core of what you're doing. And I'm curious if you could give us an example that might relate to kind of the broader picture on open access. So I'm involved in building a data studio that's an intra-university initiative that requires some of the negotiations around to build that digital infrastructure and the policies and the frameworks around open access. And I'm wondering if you've got examples of kind of inter-university agreements or partnerships that could be a bit of a model for where a lot of knowledge around climate science and research is emerging, and what can we learn from that? Because it feels like I'm pretty well versed in open access and more so on open data, but being able to kind of reference maybe a model around that collaboration that's been established around kind of shared policies and shared agreements between universities, if that's something that you've seen or come across. There's a lot of interest, but there's also a lot of other types of interest from academics that are kind of more focused on their projects, so you've talked about kind of joint incentives and kind of like the benefits and outcomes of open access. I'm really interested in the nitty-gritty, like the actual like mechanics, and if you have examples of kind of inter-university or inter kind of academic collaborations that we could point to.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I could probably only speak to it. I'm sure if you spoke to like an academic librarian, they would probably be more aware of like a specific agreement. But I can speak to something, at least an example from my work. So for my postdoctoral work, I was doing some research on how fish move within a lake as the lake warms. And so basically what we found was that as the like shallower part of the lake got warmer, fish were feeding more offshore, and that was changing the like food web connections that you have in the lake. And basically, instead of coming more inshore and making those connections with those inshore fish, they were not eating any of those inshore fish anymore. And so basically you were like getting to disparate communities, and that will affect the stability of that ecosystem. It's less, the more connections you have, the more stable of an ecosystem you have. And we got that data through the Ontario provincial government. And so they go in and do this monitoring. They've been doing this monitoring, I think, for like 50 years. And they go and monitor different lakes to see what fish are in that lake and where are we finding them. And so that helped us know that, like, oh, the bigger fish are staying offshore and they're no longer going inshore like they used to do in like the 70s. And so that was a data set that was shared by multiple universities. And so it was a data sharing agreement between the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and then universities, including the University of Guelph, the University of Toronto, Trent University. And so they had sharing agreements with the provincial government to publish results or publish research around that data. And so often what the way that was facilitated is that they would have an author from the Ministry of Natural Resources on the paper to sort of, that was sort of like the payment for the data. But some of the downsides of that is that I think it was just like, it just existed as like a big Excel file. It wasn't like some database, some central database that would be updated. It's like you had to get the newest Excel, file from the Ministry of Natural Resources. And so it wasn't ideal in that sense, right? Like ideally you would have some central repository for this data. So yeah, I mean, to sort of like to get to your question about, what is, like, I think you need like a champion in the, in the university that believes in open access. And I've seen that happen too in the federal government in Canada. So prior to working here, I worked as a senior policy advisor in the government of Canada. And the changes that you would see happen when you had a champion for open science is very different than when you don't. And so we had quite a change in open science when we had the appointment of the Chief Science Advisor, Mona Niemer, who made open science and continues to make open science one of her priorities. And so I think you need the top and the bottom, right? You need the community who believes in this, and then you need someone from management or leadership that actually can put in those policies. And so that is the perspective I'm taking in when we're going to go talk to the national governments. We're going to go and talk to, sit at the table with these decision makers that can put in a policy that then gets implemented by, the policy advisors, and then that trickles down to the scientists. And so that's sort of the perspective that we're taking. I don't know yet if it's going to be effective, but I have seen it be effective, at least in my work at the government of Canada.
Great, thank you so much.
Right, thank you. A couple things in the chat. So we have a mention of the Helios project. Thank you, Melissa. And we have another question. So I'm going to read it so that we have it in the video from Davis. So wondering about the issue of translation, both on the level of building community and then opening up materials for global use. What mechanisms can be put in place to help with this if there aren't any already?
Yeah, excellent question. So I'll tell you about what we're doing, what I'd like to do, and then what is happening in the community. Some people are doing in the community. So we are, at least on so if you go to our website, all of our action kits are translated into are in English, are in French, and Spanish, so that, we capture a bigger segment of people interested in the campaign. But I'd be remiss if I said that, that's certainly not enough. I think that's like the bare minimum that we can do. Having English be the default language for scholarship is an incredible challenge for anybody else who, like, I guess was not colonized by the British. You know, I can't imagine, so I'm learning French, and I often think about like how on earth I would ever do research in French. Like, it just would make everything that much more difficult. It would make what is already sort of a challenging process, the research life cycle, even more challenging. And so I think, you know, that the first part is to recognize that like science because it's sort of monolingual is not equitable. I think we also can turn to Latin America, who is doing, I think, a pretty good job, at least of, you know, publishing in English and in English, Spanish, and in Portuguese. I think there's also something that we were excited about in the government, and I've also seen in the community is translation. So using the power of like machine learning and automatic translations, and sort of using them more. And so something that I think we were reticent to use in the government was automatic translations. Like, we had a translation office and it was supposed to go to the translation office, but I think, you know, every time we got a paper translated, it was like $400 to $1,000 or something like that. And so there's no, so it ended up becoming a challenge, because we'd say, well, we can't put this in the open because it needs to be in both official languages, but we can't afford to put, you know, every single one of our like 5,000 publications that we publish every year in both official languages. And so I think maybe being more open to some of these like automatic translation tools may also be helpful. And there's a cool organization called Panlingua that where it's like a plugin that you can automatically just translate any like preprint on bioRxiv, which is pretty neat. And I think that we need to have more adoption of those types of practices, because, you know, I don't think we can say, well, let's just default to English being the language that we do science. And I think that's sort of the lazy way in what we have been doing. And why don't we leverage some of these tools that we have now so that we work in our language of choice, but use some of these automatic translation tools. But from the perspective of the Open Climate Campaign, we want to make sure to at least continue to translate all of our materials, to offer webinars in other languages and have simultaneous translation. So try to make it as accessible as possible. And knowing that like we'll still be sort of not as inclusive as I think is possible or ideal, and just continue working towards that.
All right, thank you. Other questions, thoughts, contributions on either of these topics, on any topic? All right, looking at the chat, so we have a helpful link from Andres, thank you, and an offer to help connect if you would like. And then just another comment from Davis, and maybe this is a bit of a prompt. And then I do want to make sure we get back to the questions that you had for the group, Monica, so perhaps this one, and then we'll head back there. So on the mention of webinars just now, one thing I haven't been able to square is the growth of technology versus the impact of climate. I wish our collaborator, Michelle Thorne from the Green Web Foundation was on to help us through this conversation, but any insight or thoughts on that you have as well, Monica?
Yeah, I get that. I've gotten this question before, right? Is it like how, well, specifically actually for like computational power, like how do we square up the potential of data and how much data we can have and how much processing we can have, or even like quantum computing potentially, with like how much energy, you know, these types of technologies or initiatives or infrastructure take, right? And so you know, quantum computing is still sort of it's from my understanding, and I'm nowhere near an expert, you know, they can be particularly resource intensive. And so, I think there needs to be some thinking from the research community about, when do we use these types of resources, and also how could we be most efficient with some of the like data repositories that we have. So ideally, you could argue that by working in the open, it's going to be more efficient in terms of like the carbon footprint of research, because you don't have to go and collect that same data. You can share that data. You don't have to have multiple copies. You could have, if the data is federated in one place, it can be just in one repository, ideally with, of course, some backups. But I don't think that we are leveraging, I think, the power of that. And there's not a lot of discussion about it, even though we know that open science is just even more efficient, more economically efficient as well. It's just easier for people to find information and find data when it's open. Yeah, I think they're just, I'm sure that there are organizations that are talking about sort of what are some standards that we can have to also think about like the carbon footprint of growing technologies. And I think there's just need to be continued discussions of that alongside the benefits of like open as well. Yeah. There's a group that's also looking at like the carbon footprint of publishing as well, and having some of that data be open, and it's really hard to get. I'll put the link in the chat. It was Chris was working on this, and trying to find like the carbon footprint of publishers, and of course that's like not data that's easy to find. And so an interesting step, and I think a fruitful step, would be for publishers to give that data out and then be held accountable to it.
All right, great. Any other burning questions that we have? If not, Monica, can we go back to the ones that you have, and perhaps we could show the slide and maybe just drop them in the chat if you have them that way, so that we can come back to group conversational format.
Yeah, so I was thinking of talking about a little bit about like engagement, and so I'll copy them here. What does meaningful engagement mean to you? What does it mean? What makes you want to be a part of a community? And I struggle with this a lot, particularly because I think, we get asked for our time a lot. And if you think about it from the perspective of the organization, you want to hear from these people, but you also want to compensate them from their time. But you can't compensate, like, there's only so much funding that you have. And so like, how do you strike the balance between, I want you to feel that your contribution to this community is meaningful and that you're getting something out of this, including potentially some compensation, but that you are getting something for your own development being part of this community. And how do you do that effectively? And then if you have any examples of things that you didn't like about other initiatives in terms of like community, being part of a community, I would love to hear from you. So I will pop those questions in the chat.
Great, and the floor is open. I know we have folks here that are community builders and have a lot of experience in this, so would love to hear any insights or ideas that you have.
Well, maybe.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, feel free to go ahead.
At the risk of the noise, I worked as a community engagement manager for several years, so I have like a lot of thoughts on this. First and foremost, I already can tell that this is a very kind and welcoming community. This is my first time here, but I already feel like so supported. So I think that's a key thing, is that there's a real feeling of like openness, so to speak, and the ability to actually ask questions that you have, even though you might feel like you're a little bit behind, is key, I think, because we have to raise the level of everyone, and it doesn't help to have people be like, oh, how you don't know that yet. So, shut people out for that. So that's one thought. The money thing is a tricky one because you definitely want to support folks, but also that prevents maybe genuine connections from happening. So we try at Metro to pay our speakers. And so folks who come through our community and have something to say that's substantive and useful, they then present a webinar, and that's where we put money into the equation. And so it's a very clear exchange, and we have it all in writing so that it feels like very organic in terms of when you get paid and when you just don't. And yeah, so I would just say that, yeah, keeping those lines very bright is important. And then also just considering that this is maybe outdated research, but I've read that like the number of connections folks can have is like 150. So trying to understand how those groups cluster and organize, maybe have a hub and spoke kind of situation going so that everyone feels like they're part of something and have the capacity to know the people that they're dealing with is important. And then finally, having boundaries, like who's the in-group, who's the out-group, is kind of an interesting thing to think about, because to feel like you're a part of something means that you get something extra special. And then maybe it can be like a bullseye kind of thing where you have rating rings outward. So I think very graphically about this question.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the bullseye model.
Cool. Yeah. And the elevator's under construction, so I'm gonna mute again, but those are my quick thoughts.
Thank you so much, Davis.
Andres?
Yes, thank you, Monica. And it's a brilliant. I mean, I feel like the name campaign is really small for everything that you are aiming in this initiative. And well, in terms of the questions that you're raising, so I've been working in the last few years. Let's say, imagine cultivating a community, and this is, I guess, the thought that I want to like share with you is this probably the meaning of the word community can have like bring different perceptions for different people, different contexts. A community maybe for a government is very different for what a community may be for an academic than from an artist. And what I have been like, well, in the sort of community that I have been nurturing, but also in other communities that I have been part of, what I noticed is that ultimately it's about weaving networks. So I feel like the concept of networks, and then like thinking actively on how these connections are not only built and traced, but also maintained, the maintenance of the networks, and thinking of some. Yeah, exactly. Some sort of, it is some sort of soft infrastructure that of course we're now always have this tendency to see everything through the digital lens, that it needs like a tool and a platform and all of this, but then there's the actual relationships or interrelationships, actually, which will be a little bit more accurate, between that are dynamic and are changing all the time. And it's also not only between the members of the network or the community, but also between the kind of groups that form, or the existing groups that come as when you have a network of organizations in different scales. So I just wanted to bring this reflection out, and also thinking about I like to think of communities as an emerging phenomena. And when it comes to people like us that have these intentions of bringing people and organizations together with a shared mission, shared purpose, the importance of, let's say, having this in mind, like designing for the complexity that this framing has. So it's more about like setting the conditions for a community or communities to emerge. Let's say, rather than following there's no kind of manual for one size fits all community. Exactly. So I think that there's this tendency, because we are calling things like Facebook, Twitter, like social media, when they are just big data extraction corporations, but and they refer themselves as social networks, but the social networks have existed all the time. That just colonize it and extract value from our social networks. So I feel that there's an important reflection there on the understanding of a community, as well of what our strength, I think, in this kind of approaches is really creating those networks, in a very, let's say, like very human first way, starting with conversations. And I just wanted to share that reflection.
Yeah. Oh, that was wonderful. Yeah, I love the term soft infrastructure. It makes me think of just something gentle. And I like this idea of the communication and maybe having one-on-one conversations with who this working group would be, and then letting the working group meet together, as opposed to just throwing them in a virtual room and magic happens. Because it's even more challenging, right, when we're working we're remotely like this to I think make meaningful connections. It's a lot easier when we're in person, I think, for at least for those sort of first meetings of these people. Thank you. That was all very valuable.
All right. Well, friends, we are down to 2 minutes before the hour. Any final questions, comments? Monica, also from you, questions, comments, any last thoughts to leave us with?
Yeah, I've got two. One is, if you are interested in talking to me more about being part of this working group, I'm going to pop the email of the Open Climate Campaign. And then I think I don't know if Dee Dee's still here, but there was a question about, they want to know more about climate justice, especially around the Open Access Week theme this year. So this year's theme is Open for Climate Justice. We're actually just grabbing the link here. We're putting together an event, actually I think it's later this week, around giving you an introduction to what is climate justice. And so I'm going to be moderating an event where I think maybe Shannon, you will be there, or somebody from your organization?
One of my colleagues will, yes.
One of your colleagues, yeah, will be there. And so we want to give people a little bit of a background or a refresher on what is climate justice, which is, it's not just talking about, we've been talking today about open research for climate change and biodiversity. It's sort of melding the natural science perspective with the social and humanities perspective of climate justice, which is something very specific. So we wanted to give people an opportunity to get more familiar with the topic so that they can take that information and then put together an event for themselves at their institutions for Open Access Week. So just popped in the link to register for that event, and we'll be sending out more information later today on the Zoom link and stuff. So yeah, I think I'll end with that.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. You will have access to the video of this call. It will be posted on the Epipedia page. Again, please leave your email. We delete the emails from the notepads. They're not public long-term, and we just put them in our file so we can email you when we have events coming up. And with that, we will go ahead and close the call. Thank you again, Monica, for joining us, and for everybody for participating. And we'll see you next time.
Gracias.